talked from 2 John in verses 10, where it says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring his teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him away, or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Can you share with us how this looks like practically from day to day? I know my husband Jason and I have never shied away from speaking with people that come to our door. And even one time, I brought 2 Mormon women in to share verses on the deity of Christ. So I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
That is a good question. Now, tell me your name again.
Molly, Julian.
Molly, okay. Molly. Yes, hello. That's Jason's wife. It's amazing how these lights are. So thanks, Molly. Okay, real quickly, look at, if you don't have what she was referencing, she was talking about 2 John, and she asked, how do we put practically into practice 2 John chapter 1, verses 7 through 11. And now don't go away. You come back in just a minute there. But 2 John this morning, and I don't assume that all of you are even here this morning. The reason I know that is I always range around the auditorium morning and evening, and I try and look for people, I don't know their names, and I buzz right up to them, and I scare them. Because I say, have I met you before? And they go, I'm not a member. And I'm not on a membership campaign, I'm on a memory loss campaign, and I'm practicing. And it's so sweet when someone visits from another church. Like this morning, I found 5 people from the same church. I went up and I said, I've never met you before. And they go, we're from a different church. And they named it. And I said, praise the Lord, I'm glad you're from there. What are you doing here? But it's just fun. So that's just for you to know. But second, if you weren't here this morning, we were looking at 2 John 1, 7 through 11. And what Molly, is that how you pronounce M-A-L-I? Okay, Molly. It says, verse 10, if someone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, don't receive him into your house nor greet him. The first canon of textual interpretation, there are laws of how you interpret the Bible, or a long time ago they used to call them canons of textual interpretation. The first one is, what did God mean when he wrote it to the intended recipient, the primary recipient? Remember, this book is for all of us from God, but the way he first sent it, like the law on Sinai, was to the Jews. Now, we have a secondary benefit. It's the Word of God, and it reveals the character of God. But who were the primary recipients? Because that, what did God mean to say to the primary recipients? It's hard to talk and write, to the primary recipients. In other words, who he wrote it to. And so that's where understanding history and language and culture and everything else gives us a better framework. So think about the first century world. Think about the fact that nobody had garage door openers and cars, and you could wave at people and go in your garage and they never meet you their whole life. I mean, and you can, we lived in California enough years that you can hardly know anybody that lives around you. And I'm sure it's not changed much nowadays. It's becoming like California everywhere, that everybody waves to each other, but nobody knows each other. It wasn't that way in the first century. For one thing, most homes didn't have a bathroom. Did you know that? Have you ever thought of that? They all went to public bathrooms and public bathhouses and a well. They didn't have running water in their house. And they didn't have refrigerators, so they got their food just about every day. And so community was absolutely different than anything that most of us Americans would think of. I mean, when is the last time you walked somewhere to take a bath or to use the restroom? I mean, other than padding down your carpeted floor. So we don't have any concept of how close people lived, most people back then. I mean, their houses all abutted and adjoined and had shared walls mostly, In the cities, especially in the cities, out in the country, even then they usually they weren't like the little house in the big woods and the little house on the prairie and on Plum Creek. They all were close together because of protection and everything else. And they'd go out to their field, but they'd come back to their house. And they would walk by usually 3 generations. Most homes had 3 generations, the grandparents, the parents, and the children. And when Grandma and Grandpa died, the parents moved into the grandparents' thing, their kids got married, and their children went. And it just was kind of this cycle. So there was closeness. So what did it mean to the recipients? Well, right here, what he's saying is that if this noted false teacher denier of Christ is walking down the street talking to people, and he knocks on your door, and you are the Christian, and this has happened to us in different places where we've lived, we have shared the gospel with the people that live around us, and they knew that we were Christians. But to them, non-church-going pagan people that live all around you that don't have a clue, religious people are religious people. And if someone comes and says that they're Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't know the difference between that and the Baptist or the Bible church or whatever you are. They're just all religious people, and they carry big books, and they're always going to church. And so, in the first century, it would be known, if your houses were like this, and your house, you're the Christian, and you live across the street, and you're the only Christian in the block, and the false teacher walks down the street, and he's, false hit wherever, like the JWs with their little suitcase knocking on doors, and they get to your door, and you open the door and say, "Come on in." What do they all think? I bet that's someone from their church. That's probably what they are. We'll let them in our house too. You understand the idea? When you're living so close and everybody knows, it's kind of like when I grew up, it was a party line. And if someone said something funny on the phone, you'd hear laughing. Because several people were listening. They always listened, You could always, in fact, you could make announcements on the party line. And you had certain neighbors that were notorious for listening to everything, And so that proximity made it so that anything you did, people noted it. And so reading that into the context there, he says, if anyone comes to you and doesn't bring this doctrine, don't receive him into your house nor greet him. Back then, they didn't have Motel 6s or Hiltons or anything else. And so travelers would come looking for places to stay, another thing. And people were given to hospitality back then, that they knew that there was nowhere else to stay and you weren't going to sleep. Remember the guy in Judges 19 to 21, the guy who comes into the square and has his concubine with him, and the person says, "Don't want you to stay on the square all night. They might, bother you." And they took him into the house. That whole story, that whole idea was this small community. So the primary meaning of this is, I would say this, if we brought it down to 21st century, don't confuse people, okay? And so to apply that nowadays, the normal thing I do, when they come to our door, I step out, pull the door shut, and the 2 white shirts or the briefcase carrying ones, they say, "Hello." And usually there's a trainer and an expert there. And I try and figure out who's who, and then I start talking to the trainee. There's a trainee and a trainer, and the trainer is the expert. And the trainee is just trying to learn the ropes. And I step out to honor this because especially in our subdivision we lived in 14 years, the person on our left was certainly not a Christian. The person on our right, depending on who was living there at that time, sometimes was a Christian, sometimes not. And the 3 facing us were certainly not believers. So we were surrounded by 4 or 5 pagan families. And when the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons came down the street, the 5 families never went to church anywhere. And to them, if I let them in, they probably would have let them in too, just to see why we let them in, because they knew because we had shared the gospel. We had opened our home at Christmas and had, every neighbor in a neighborhood and talked about the Lord and shared the gospel with them. So they might think that those people that came to our house might be what we are. And they're always curious. Unsaved people are always curious. That's why it's good to cultivate unsaved friends. And even a lot of people, like when they're going on missions trips and send out their little letters to every person they've ever met, send them to a few unsaved people. You know why? You might be the only Christian they ever get close to. And they're so curious about what we do and why we do it and how we do it and everything else. So what did God mean to say to the primary recipients? Don't put the seal on that person of you letting them in your house, you giving them a blessing. They're going to eat with you, sleep with you. You're going to feed them. Don't do that, because that's notice what it says. If you, in verse 11, if you greet him, you share in his evil deeds. Because when the person comes out of your house, you go, God bless you. Yeah, there was a much more civil, kind of proper way back then that you greeted people. You gave them the old kiss on both sides. I mean, have you ever been to, like Russia or something? I mean, you get worn out with all the kisses that everybody gives everybody. It's the holy kiss thing. But in their culture, they have that. And so it's kind of like acceptance and that you're okay. And so they see you on the doorstep and you greet them, you take them in and feed them, or they stay with you. Then when they come out, you give them the verse 11, you greet them. You're sharing in their evil deeds if they go and spread that evil about the doctrine of Christ. So that's the primary meaning. Don't confuse people, especially about the gospel. And it's interesting what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, don't invite an alcoholic into your house. It doesn't say, don't invite a drug addict into your house. My parents brought everybody from the mission that they could bring into our house and made us kids sleep on the floor. But it says, don't bring someone who is a trained, look what it says here, one who does not abide in the doctrine of Christ. He does not have God. It's not a normal lost person. It's someone intent on deception. Don't give them a platform in your life. Don't open for unsuspecting, unsaved people. Don't open the door of curiosity for them to know. And so I would talk to them on the doorstep. Many times my kids were behind the 9-pane glass door watching as I was standing out there, and as soon as I figured out who was the trainee, I would always say, and this is a killer, you say, they have their Bible, whatever it is, New World or whatever. I say, could I look at that for a minute and show you something? They go, they don't know. So they just give it to me. Oh, that boils the trainer. You're not supposed to do that. Because what I show them from their Bible, because you can get the gospel in the New World, the Jehovah's Witness Bible. You can, they've only doctored a few places of it. The Romans Road is still in there. And you can start sharing. And about 30 seconds into your thing, the trainer will go and take the Bible out of your hands and say, we're moving. And they just, to the next place. And it's very clear, if anybody's watching across the street, that there was an abrupt, and it's over, and it's my way. I don't put up a sign saying, they're bad, watch out. But you try and not confuse. Now, I have many friends who will talk with them and say, you know what, I'd love to talk with you more. And we'll just arrange another time, and we'd like to sit, and there's a lot of people that love to share the gospel. But this verse does say, in the context of an unexpected bumping into your door, especially if you've ever shared the gospel with the people that live around you, don't confuse those people into thinking those are possibly representatives of the same God that we have. So it's good to share the gospel, and that's why these little papers. The whole purpose of what I showed you right here is to witness to Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Moonies, the Baha'i, the Hindus, the Muslims, and everybody else. But 2 John says, in no way should my behavior confuse them. And you heard me talk about it this morning. To stand shoulder to shoulder with a pagan and declare truth about Christ, even if what they're saying is the truth, if it's from the Bible, is very confusing for unsaved people. They say, so you believe, like if you're in a joint event with unbelievers that's religious, you believe what they believe? You agree with them? I mean, it confuses. Lost people are confused anyway. They think we're crazy. I mean, we go to church, you're never home, you're always in the morning, in the evening, on Sunday, and on Saturday you go do stuff too. You're crazy, what's wrong with you? That's bad enough. But then when they can't figure out denominations, they don't know what cults are, and when all of that it just confuses them.